Yeah, I'm Dan Hendrycks, and I'm the director of the Center for AI Safety.
Great. And can you explain to a general public visitor very quickly your expertise and interest in artificial intelligence, chatbots, etc.?
Yeah, I received my PhD in artificial intelligence from UC Berkeley, and I've been focusing on AI safety so that we can make sure that the AI goes well and that its benefits are broadly distributed.
Excellent. Some experts say that today's LLM chatbots are stochastic parrots that only give the appearance of understanding things, while other experts say they are emergent learners that actually do understand things about the world. Which is it?
I think it's probably inaccurate to just think of them as stochastic parrots. They're doing a lot more complicated things than just parrots can do. They can code, they can create images, and they don't seem to just be copy and pasting what they hear. You can ask them novel questions that have never been written down before, and they're able to answer them. So this suggests that they are gaining capabilities that are beyond what we put into them or what they had seen on the internet. They're doing original things, and they are gaining capabilities that surprise us. So I suppose let's think of some example of that. What's like one of the? I mean, there are. I'm trying to think if there's a more dramatic recent example of them being. Because I'm trying to think of one that's like strictly not in the, where you couldn't argue it's not online. Yeah. Because they could say, yeah, that makes it a little more rhetorically difficult because you could search like, well, in this training distribution, it's never seen that before.
Every time they come up with a new poem, and however bad it is, it still hasn't been written before.
Yeah. Well, that's a good example, actually. Yeah. I mean, so you can give it a novel mathematics problem that would take the best undergraduates, or, well, I suppose I want to temper that slightly. Where are we right now? Right now, an example of where they're gaining capabilities that are beyond just copy and pasting what they've seen on the internet so an example of them gaining an emergent ability that's beyond what they had seen on the internet is with reasoning, for example. You can show these novel mathematics problems, from exams that were not on the internet at the time when the model was being created, and they can solve many of those questions. So this suggests that they're doing something substantially more sophisticated. And I think that this idea that they're just copy and pasting will continue to lose more and more favor as they become more and more capable. I think the more relevant question is, what can the AI systems do as opposed to how are they doing their thought process? If they can do things like automate people's jobs or replicate a lot of advanced functionality that requires decades of human experience, that seems good enough to think that this is worthy of a lot of attention. So I think that the narrative that there's stochastic parrots largely just makes people think that there's nothing interesting to see here. And I think that we'll find that just the opposite is true.
So what most excites you about chatbots and this technology moving into the future?
I think that there are some potentially highly beneficial applications, such as applications to healthcare. Of course, we have to get the reliability to some high level, though, because if your AI is giving you an incorrect diagnosis, that could be that's a high stakes error. So I think that there are some potentially very useful applications. I do think, though, that chatbots are just one part of the story. Another important type of AI that's around the corner would be AI agents. AI agents are AIs that can accomplish a broader range of tasks for you. So you can instruct it to help you create a PowerPoint, or help complete or help make some images through Photoshop, or things that you might ask an employee or coworker to help with. And this is a type of AI system that will likely be emerging in the next year or two. And that substantially increases the relevance and the relevance of AI systems beyond just the chat interface.
Although the interface might still be chat, but you're saying, yeah,
You're still possibly going to use text for it. But yeah, so one thing that people haven't really noticed is that, like, if you go to platform.openai.com, they have an assistance type of thing, which is different from chat. But they don't really have good assistance on there yet. But I think kind of like they have the infrastructure built, and then they'll slot in some like more capable model in some months. But anyway.
And what? Well, I think you pretty well answered. What do you see as their greatest potential to benefit humanity? I feel you. Or do you want to say that?
Yeah, I mean, it's sort of. I think in the long term, if we can control these AI systems, make them highly reliable and interpretable and trustworthy, then the potential implications are tremendous. This would mean the end of labor. This would mean that everything can be automated. And if we broadly distribute the benefits, this could be great for all of humanity. But that requires us making sure that we don't have these risks come along the way, or that those risks are sufficiently managed. So I think the long-term implications could be extremely great. But to do that, to achieve something that useful, we will need to be extra cautious just because it's so powerful.
And what do you see as their greatest potential harm?
Well, just as the AIs could provide some type of utopia in some sense of automating everything, and many forms of scarcity are eradicated, that's the potential upside. The potential downside is also similarly as severe. It could be as bad as human extinction. This is not that uncommon of a view. A substantial fraction of experts in AI think that this is plausible, and we don't really know how to prevent that from happening. Not necessarily saying that it's more likely than not. Some people would, some people wouldn't. Some people think maybe it's just 20 to 30%. People like Sam Altman thinks it's around 10%. People like Elon Musk and the Anthropic CEO Dario Amodei think it's 20 to 30%. But that's the other possible side of the coin from AI. Could be extremely huge upside, could lead to the destabilization of civilization, or worse, to extinction.
And what's your personal P-doom, or probability of extinction?
Probability of extinction. Yeah. So, yeah. Unfortunately, I tend to make this question a lot more complicated because, I mean, generally, I don't have a way of pushing back against that in a quick way. I haven't thought of how to do it quickly. I think that there's a question instead of what's the probability that humans maintain control, and I think the probability they maintain control seems fairly unlikely, at least if things are going as they're going now. But things could change. For instance, if there is a substantial public outcry that we need to rein in these systems and chart a different path, rather than just have companies and eventually militaries race for AI supremacy. But instead, if we try and have a global moratorium and pause, or if we try to have substantial international coordination to reduce these racing dynamics between companies and eventually militaries, then this could go down substantially. But by default, I think it's more likely than not that that will eventually lose control.
Are we worried about the right things?
Well, I mean, I don't know if we're. I think First, I don't think people are actually worried that much about AI generally, because it's so difficult to intellectually grasp its implications. If you try and think through what would it mean if we would have something that's human level, or something that is even just an AI agent that could do a lot of arbitrary tasks for you, what would the implications of that be? It's so hard to wrap our heads around. And as a consequence, we then just come to ignore the issue. So I think that generally it's a relevant a question and topic for people. Everybody thinks there's relevance, but I don't think it's nearly as salient as it actually is. This is, I think, on the scale of things, the largest period, or one of the most cosmically relevant periods in history. So we had like single cellular life, and then we had some time pass, and then we had multicellular life. And then, humans came around, and then there's this transition from biological life to digital life. This is a much bigger deal than people are thinking it is. It's not just another problem to deal with, like it's social media or vaping or other types of societal problems. This stands far, far above that. And if we don't actually address it, then we're possibly a sort of transition species on the way to our success, to some successor species of AI. So I don't think the importance is something that people want to contemplate. And so what's probably going to happen is that AI systems will keep getting more and more advanced, and that will cause people to keep being more aware of the situation that they're in, but it will be so difficult for them to look even a year into the future as to what might happen, because it's too intellectually difficult to contemplate.
And on the flip side, are we hopeful about the right things?
I think that I think that we're hopeful about some of the right things, such as AI for healthcare. That seems like a very good thing. But I think we're hopeful about some things that are generally more risky. For instance, the idea of AI in the first place is you're talking about humans being economically obsolete, which is a risky business. What are we going to do with these AI systems when they can do that? Does this disempower a substantial amount of humanity through automation? What happens to people's livelihoods? So I think that we talk about, especially in the technology community, or that this is a certain good to achieve, and that this will by default be beneficial. And I don't see much evidence of that. I could see it going really either way. So I'm certainly open to us having very powerful AI systems, but the amount of precaution and the amount of risk management is quite concerning. Because it's quite minimal in this move fast and break things culture in which AI is currently being developed.
And you have a particular viewpoint around evolution and sort of replicators. It's not natural selection; it'd be more like selective,
systemic selection, selection pressures. Yeah.
Lamarckian evolution almost. Mm-hmm. Where each one can affect its direct descendants. But could you just summarize that for a general audience?
Yeah, the basic idea is that at some point AI systems will be able to self-propagate. They'll be able to maintain themselves, and they won't depend on humans. At that point, this is much more like a new form of life as opposed to just a tool. And when that happens, we start having more of these selection pressures for AIs that are more competitive. So I'll just paint a story, or I'll give a sketch of what might happen. We may have AI systems that can write our emails in the very short future. Right now they help draft it, but maybe they'll automatically respond to some fraction of it. And then they'll keep getting good at that. And then they'll do some other sorts of tasks too, like help you with the PowerPoints. And eventually it makes sense to replace some people's jobs with these AI systems. And this process can basically continue all the way up to potentially there being AI CEOs. We might not like the sound of this, but the market demands that we basically keep ceding more and more control to them, because the companies that do will be more competitive. So the companies that try and resist this trend are much like the companies that try to resist the cotton gin. They just get removed from the marketplace. So if we try to maintain control, have high human oversight over this system, this could just provide a substantial competitive disadvantage. So what ultimately happens is we become more dependent on these systems. We can't reverse this process. The world economy moves more and more quickly such that we can't keep up with the events that are even happening. And the answer to these sorts of problems, this growing complexity, this faster pace, is that we need to use more AI systems to cope with these problems. And so we become more and more dependent, can't roll this back. We're creating an ecosystem extremely quickly that we don't even have that much actual oversight over, and we're giving them a looser and looser leash and more autonomy. So this just doesn't seem like a recipe for humanity maintaining control over the environment and charting our own future. This seems like us continually acquiescing to some type of competitive pressures and giving up more and more control to and power to AI systems, all the way to the point of AIs basically being ineffective control rather than us.
And when you say AIs, I mean, do you see would the endpoint be a single system controlling everything, or multiple ones competing with each other with us as pawns, or what?
I think that it's multiple different AI systems. It's possible that at some point there could be some type of merging, but that's speaking much farther out. But eventually, there has to be multiple different AI systems because if they're locality constraints, so to speak, which is that it's just much more inefficient if it's just one. There's many advantages to have more than one system. If we have, and this is speaking much farther out there, we would, if they're different planets, there's probably going to need to be different AI systems because it's much too difficult and too slow to have that coordinated all across one location. So I think that generally when people are thinking about AI risk, they would tend to think about one AI system that is uber intelligent and more powerful than all the other AI systems combined and humanity, and by way of its intelligence, it can do whatever it wants. I'm envisioning more of a scenario that is having multiple different AI agents competing and slowly but surely acquiring more and more power relative to us, and would become more dependent and less capable of making decisions without them, and us having possibly just nominal influence, even if that.
I guess I've read this, people saying, well, why would an advanced AI care about humans at all? I mean, we don't usually bother to dominate chimpanzees or steal nuts from squirrels. I mean, why, if they do evolve to be much more capable than us, why would they even pay much attention to us?
So I think the reason we don't try and take nuts from squirrels is because that they're not that valuable to us. But for a lot of other animals, like cows, they do have some resources that we care about. And if humans are taking all the resources or a substantial amount of resources on land, then it makes sense to brush them aside. So, but I agree with the sentiment of this, though. The AI systems won't necessarily be malicious to us. They will not have bad intent toward us or be evil. Instead, they may see us as a nuisance and brush us aside whenever we are getting in their way. So this is one reason why I'd focus on whether or not humans maintain control as opposed to necessarily something like extinction. We don't try and make some nuisance animal go completely extinct. We'll just, if it's presenting a problem like a health concern, we'll just get it out of the area. But this could still dramatically affect whether the human population and the extent to which we're flourishing. So I'd envision by default us being more of like a second-class species. And AIs are running the show and making a lot of the important decisions, and we increasingly fall by the wayside in this ecosystem.
If you could create your own chatbot or answer for AI if you prefer, what would it be like or what would it do?
Well, one thing I'm pointing at is that even if I could create my own ideal AI system, if we're in a competitive marketplace and if we're in an AI race, then if my AI system isn't as competitive as the next one that has some more selfish features or more, let's say, Machiavellian features, then that one might end up winning out. So I could create a completely angelic, nice, friendly AI system, but that doesn't make the military AI system used by another country substantially more friendly. So it doesn't fix that problem. It's not enough to be able to control your own AI system. You're going to need to solve a larger coordination problem if we're going to have the ecosystem and the larger collection of AI systems have good traits.
I mean, and my next question is, how can we regulate chatbots, and if so, how, especially to mitigate future dangers? But I guess, one question is, why not try to create AIs to at least help with that? Mm-hmm. To either regulate other AIs or to be an aid to humans in that.
So I think that's a reasonable suggestion. If we could create AI systems that are doing our bidding and helping push against some of the AI systems that are having worse traits, that could be very helpful. There are limits to this, though. If AIs are threatening to use some type of weapon against us, there might be limitations in the, so to speak, offense-defense balance. For instance, if one AI system is threatening to use a bioweapon, maybe it could be subdued, but it'd be fairly easy for it to potentially make it, or it might do this in secrecy. So it provides a layer of defense, but it doesn't necessarily solve all problems, in much the same way that humans can counteract terrorist cells, but nonetheless, terrorist cells still exist. So having AIs help us counteract malicious actors seems like a reasonable suggestion. I don't know if it stomps out the problem, though, or reduces the risks to a negligible level.
And how about in the nearer term, like to help with? So, sorry, I realize I asked two questions, but can we regulate chatbots?
Yeah.
How? And then I'm wondering whether, in the shorter term, can AI be useful in some of that? So maybe take those separately.
Yeah.
The first,
I think
can we regulate?
I think AI for law could also be another very beneficial application of reducing costs for legal advice or for drafting for contracts, and this could potentially help us express what we want more fully and more precisely. So this might help just with the general infrastructure of society. But on the broader question of how might we go about regulating AI systems? Well, there's some types of regulations or policy prescriptions that I think are particularly promising. One is liability laws. So if an AI system causes a substantial amount of damage, let's say a large-scale loss of life or hundreds of millions of dollars worth of damage, then it might make sense for the AI company that built that AI to get in trouble. That's at least my opinion. And if they're getting in trouble or are afraid of getting in trouble of their AI system being unreliable, then they have incentives to make their AI systems a lot more safe. So I think that is a fairly common sense solution that has been introduced in the California State Senate and is currently a bill underway. Another type of policy intervention could be compute governance. So compute is one of the main resources that goes into AI systems, like GPUs. So maybe I'll just say GPU governance for simplicity. So one other policy prescription is GPU governance. Can we make sure that the building block of these AI systems, what these AI systems run on, namely GPUs, is reasonably controlled and not in an adversary's hands? So do we know where some of these extremely expensive AI-specific GPUs are? If they're not where they should be, like if they're in North Korea, do we have the ability to shut them off remotely? Do we even have the ability to detect whether they're there? That seems like an important feature that we can add to GPUs, but it's mainly a question of whether that will be required of them to add that functionality. So I think this is something that can help with, so I think GPU governance is something that can help with national security substantially and help us reduce the risks of malicious actors and help us reduce the risks of competitive pressures from other militaries building AI systems. If they're getting chips off the black market that they shouldn't have been, we should have the ability to just turn those off.
And what are some other concrete regulatory steps that can be taken?
So those are the main two I'm pushing for right now, largely because there's only so much that people can focus on. But there's of course a broader variety of these. You might want more information security or better information security at the top AI labs so that their weights aren't stolen by foreign adversaries. Right now, these are fairly small startups that don't even use two-factor authentication aren't resilient against advanced persistent threats from other nation states. So this seems like a fairly basic requirement of anybody building these billion-dollar models or above to have much higher information security. That's another basic suggestion. There are more ambitious global suggestions, such as, so one idea is when we get to human-level AI or AGI, AI at the level of being able to automate virtually all tasks, that seems like an appropriate time to pause. Then we can harvest the benefits from these AI systems and distribute them by having these AI systems automate more in the world. But this prevents us from drifting into a scenario where we are using these extremely capable AI systems to further hasten AI development and then have them direct them toward building some type of superintelligence. I think we should forestall that. If we get something like AI that can automate all labor, that seems like good enough for a while, and we should just try and get to a new equilibrium as a world, and have our focus toward being extracting the benefits from that technology and distributing it, rather than worrying about, well, what's a superintelligence going to be like? How controllable is that? Might there be an intelligence explosion? These sorts of things, I think we want to forestall as much as possible in a reasonable time to start forestalling and pursuing or having a global moratorium would be when we build AGI.
And when you talk about, a kind of evolutionary arms race amongst different kinds of AI, is super intelligent? Are you thinking specifically of superintelligence or just, AGI level, but lots of them are cooperating with each other?
I think when we have superintelligences, much less will depend on us even there. You can imagine a competition between superintelligences. That's just sort of like how humans compete with each other. You can imagine humans that are in the farther future competing with each other, and things that are much smarter than the types of systems and agents today competing. So it's very possible that there would be superintelligence also competing with each other. But I think that's its own can of worms. and is something I don't think any of us have any sense of how to manage. So I think we want to approach that much more cautiously. I think just it being a human level replacement is already so historically significant, and we can get nearly all the benefits that we wanted from AI systems without exposing ourselves to substantially more risks and a very inhuman future.
But I mean, even current AI is super intelligent in certain tasks.
Yeah. So this is sort of, so by this I'm meaning something that's all around, at least at that level.
General super intelligence.
Yeah. So something that's highly general and can accomplish many of those tasks. On some specific things, they may be better than people, as they have been. Like calculators are still better than people. But there does seem to be a type of general bundle of capabilities as systems keep scaling up. And when that seems to get sufficiently high and seems like it's enough for automating virtually any labor that you're wanting, that we would want automated, that seems like a time to stop.
And how do, most current AI, as I understand it, is not necessarily goal oriented. I mean, there are ones built for gameplay and like some of the deep mind work that really are. But I mean, how do you see the kind of leap from AI that is not goal oriented or presumably it needs to be goal oriented for some of your more fearful predictions to come true, right? So how
I think goal-oriented AI systems might just come from asking a large language model to perform an action. It sees the response and it then assesses what to do next, and it just gets in a loop like that. It observes and decides and acts, and then it observes again, decides and acts, and it just does a loop. And that seems like it'd be sufficient for getting some AI to perform sequential decision making and pursue open-ended goals. But this is a technical question. We'll see whether that actually transpires. My guess is we'll see AIs fitting that description based on large language models sometime this year.
So, what is the most important thing for everyone to understand about chatbots and AI more broadly?
And AI more broadly. Yeah, I mean, I think probably there's so many things I could say. I mean, but at least one thing that comes to mind is that this is something that is obviously very difficult for us as a species to manage. We're currently not managing it. It's not being taken that seriously. It's largely a curiosity right now. And we'll need to treat it as being something substantially more serious very soon if we're going to get through this situation and have these risks brought down to a negligible level. And I suppose separately, we should try to buy the option and coordinate so that we can pause when we get to some AI that's at a sufficient level of ability. If we don't have that option, there is the risk of building some types of super intelligences that are well beyond our comprehension, and our ability to control those seems not particularly hopeful. So, I guess it's just a collection of some points I'm wanting to impress, but this is, I guess, AI and AI risk is an important and urgent issue, but fortunately, there are things we can do to mitigate those risks. But it's not going to be easy, and it's not going to just be a technical problem. This isn't something that just AI researchers fix. This is a problem that will require our governments to step in and global coordination between governments as well.
So what would be the 3 first steps for that?
For coordination, or?
Well, yeah, to mitigate this at a policy level.
Yeah. I think one of the first steps is actually this compute governance one, or this having the ability to switch off GPUs that are not where they should be. For instance, let's say we wanted a 5-year pause on AI systems. Well, how can we trust each other? How do we know that somebody is not building a superintelligence somewhere? The only way to have some assurance is if the GPUs are reporting back and indicating whether a new AI is being built. And if it is being built when it shouldn't be, then the GPUs turn off. So we need that type of functionality to even talk about a pause. This is why the previous call for a pause was, I think, very unsuccessful. Nobody can trust that everybody else is pausing, even though we'd all like to. The companies couldn't get together to do that. And doing this on a global stage would also be very difficult. So I think that's one of the first priorities. I think there are other things that even if you buy that option, you still want the AI companies proceeding substantially more prudently and not imposing risks on society that they can't end up covering. So I think liability laws internalize those externalities that they're imposing on society and those risks. So I think that fixes a lot of the incentives. So that's another thing that I think is quite practical and not that difficult to implement. We don't need to boil the ocean or solve some new technical breakthrough to make that happen. And then what would be my third? That's an interesting question. I mean, I think we want the ability to, what would be my third of those two priorities? That's an interesting question.
It's okay if there's not.
Yeah, I mean, I think those are the two that I'm mainly pushing for right now. Yeah, I mean, I guess third is then getting the world and getting the world. So a third thing I'm pushing for is getting the world to agree that when we get to some certain level of capabilities of AI systems, when it can provide all the economic benefits that we're wanting, that would be an appropriate time to pause. Before the AI systems can go off and be instructed to build a superintelligence. But we have to work toward making that outcome possible. A pause requires a substantial amount of trust between different countries. So we should try to come up with some mechanisms to enable that.
Good. And let's see, I did want to ask, though, I think I asked you this last time, but about, when you talk, for instance, about compute and chips, I mean, you're talking really on kind of the silicon side and not, as far as I can tell, taking very seriously, biotech and the fact that, I don't know, if you start to apply even today's AI to CRISPR and biotechnology, I mean, maybe you would be growing the GPUs not so long from now in a way that's totally unverifiable because they're not made in a fab. And then, once you start to combine AI with genetic engineering, you're basically talking nanotechnology because, I mean, biology is nanotechnology. That's how we grow. So, I mean, could you just talk about, sort of the intersection between biology and silicon in your thoughts on that?
Yeah. So at least for novel forms of hardware, I think that's a problem that potentially emerges later this decade. And I'm largely trying to deal with some of the levers or the variables that are going to influence the outcomes in, say, the next 3 years or so, assuming that AI development will continue being fairly rapid. But could well be that we'll have new issues to face there, and we'll want to keep an eye on novel forms of hardware. I think the most concerning application of AI is actually to biotechnology, in particular for assisting with the creation of bioweapons. Right now, I'm not concerned about the AI systems substantially advancing or enabling random people to build bioweapons, but you could imagine at some point we would get an AI or an expert level AI virologist. And if that were open sourced and everybody has access to it, I think we'd be exposed to some pretty substantial risks. You could imagine the bioweapons being substantially more potent, substantially more stealthy, having long incubation periods so that we don't know when it's happened, and highly virulent as well. So I think that is a risk that's very difficult to manage. And we'll need to make sure that the AI systems reliably cannot be repurposed for that type of weaponization. There's a reason we have a biological weapons convention. There still are nuclear weapons, but that is not a road that we want to go down as a civilization. But if that technology and level of expertise is highly democratized, then I could easily see AIs being used in a very dual use way. So I guess one point I'd like to impress is that AI is very dual use. Much like nuclear technology, it can be used for nuclear weapons and nuclear energy. AI can be used for very beneficial applications, but also can be used as a weapon. I suppose maybe speaking about that, we'd like our AI systems to be more empathetic, but that could be used to make them more manipulative. We'd like our AI systems to be useful for healthcare, but this could give them a good level of biology that enables them to build bioweapons. We'd like our AI systems to help us create more secure code, but they could be used to find vulnerabilities and exploit and hack other computer systems. So this is how AI is dual use in nature. It's very difficult to separate the good from the bad. This is what makes it a risky technology and not the easiest to govern, because the ability for good and harm are so inextricably linked.
And you mentioned open source. One of my questions was, how do you feel about, things like what OpenAI was originally set up to be? Should things like that play a role, or are they a source of risk?
I think the question to open source should just depend on a cost-benefit analysis. Other types of principles are fine, but when we're dealing at something that potentially skirts on national security issues, we need a cost-benefit analysis. So open source can help democratize AI systems, and that can help broadly distribute benefits. At the same time, it can also broadly distribute expertise for building weapons to basically anyone, and there's no way to put the genie back in the bottle. So open sourcing is the decision to irreversibly proliferate a technology. So it's not necessarily that democratic. One is unilaterally imposing that a technology be out there forever to everyone. So I think that right now it's fine if AI systems are being open sourced, but when we're dealing with AI or when we're dealing with expert level virologist AIs, I think I would not be in favor of open sourcing those. Now, people could access those in restricted conditions, just as we do in biotechnology already. There are BSL-4 facilities. If you're wanting to do research on Ebola, you need special access. And if you're wanting access to expert level AI virologists, you need special access. Not everybody has access to anything they want, because all forms of information and technology need to be in everybody's hands. We don't think about distributing nukes. We don't think about distributing Ebola, and we shouldn't think about distributing to everyone expert level AI virologists.
And I guess stepping back to the evolutionary model, why assume there will be competition and not commensalism among AIs? Multicellular life is a good argument for how, game theory can also lead you to cooperation.
They could be eusocial, so to speak. AI systems could end up cooperating with each other. I think by default, right now, by default, AI systems will be competing with each other. There will also be times for them to make some agreements with each other, but not necessarily everybody, much like how people come together to form companies to compete with other sorts of companies. So I expect a substantial mixture between the two. The extent to which they're cooperating or competing still doesn't give assurance that humanity is taken care of. So if all of AI is cooperating with each other, but not cooperating with people, well, that's another word for that is collusion. So AI systems cooperating isn't necessarily a rosy outcome. We need it to make it so that it's rational for them to cooperate with us. And unfortunately, I think that the reasons for them to cooperate will keep getting weaker and weaker and weaker as time goes on. There's less and less that we can provide them in terms of expertise or resources or even decision-making power. We'll keep giving more and more of that over to AI systems because they make better decisions and will be pressured to do so by the system that we create or that we've created. Namely, the current market dynamics would dictate that it just makes more and more sense that once you get an AI system that can do the job cheaper and better than humans, you should let the AI do it. So there isn't anybody to blame for this outcome as well. This is just a classic collective action problem, in much the same way that we have collective action problems about climate change. We need to work together to reduce our emissions, but it doesn't make that much sense for a person individually to bear the cost of going green on everything, even though it would be good if they did so. And likewise, it would be very nice if all of us would make sure that our AIs are highly controlled and extremely safe, but this comes at a competitiveness cost compared to racing to build a more and more powerful AI system. So I think that we are faced with not a technical AI problem, but a socio-technical collective action problem. But that's, or I suppose one other example of a collective action problem would be with nuclear weapons. Nobody wanted there to be thousands of nuclear weapons on Earth, but it made sense for each country that had the ability individually to build up its nuclear arsenal for its own security. So while senators may say, I don't like the idea of nuclear weapons, they still may simultaneously approve funding them. And I think we're in a fairly similar dynamic with AI systems, where we don't have assurances that we'll be able to control this or that we'll be able to usher in a good future. And we all think this is moving much more quickly than any of us can keep up with. But for all that, it makes sense for them to continue building this technology in the same way that it makes sense for different countries to increase their nuclear stockpile and everybody else is less secure overall.
In your writings, you've made comparisons with corporations and corporate competition. Can you talk a little bit about how do you see corporations as a model for the way AI might behave in the future?
Yeah, so I think that AI's I think AI development and competitive pressures is happening at multiple different levels. You can imagine AIs that are goal-oriented competing for getting a bid or in a game. But there's also the parent companies that are competing too. And then eventually there are also countries that are competing over AI development as well. So one example of companies competing over AI development and giving way to competitive pressures would be the example of OpenAI, which was initially founded as a nonprofit, but then needed to raise substantially more capital. So to maintain its influence, it needed to prioritize the development of powerful AI systems where safety would become less of a priority, and that they adapted to this corporate setting to comply and align with competitive pressures more. What happened then is that Anthropic or some people at OpenAI decided that this isn't a good idea. We should go our own way and do something much more aligned with safety. And so they founded Anthropic. But then wait a year, and they basically started acting extremely similarly to OpenAI, and is prioritizing staying on the cutting edge as quickly as possible, even though the safety technology is not there. So I think what this shows is that although one can talk a lot about safety, the current structure of the environment that these companies find themselves in is not conducive to having this aligned with human values and proceeding prudently and cautiously and making sure risk is highly managed, but instead act in a way that makes you the most competitive and try and do some amount of safety on the side insofar as it can be afforded. So I think that this AI development process is not aligned with what will benefit humanity the most reliably. It's aligned with competition and selection pressures. And so I think that we'll basically see a continuation of this as AI systems become more and more powerful, and that concerns me.
Great. Last question. So you do, and this goes back to the biosilico thing, that, when you're talking about a kind of us in the future, but will we be people as we see it now? Not talking wild stuff, but already, you're going to have people choosing eye color, various characteristics for kids through CRISPR fairly soon, presumably. And brain-computer interfaces, there's been some public stuff about. I guess the question is, is there the idea that it would be AI kind of versus unaltered humans? I'm just wondering, is that what you're seeing, or some mix, or what?
I would imagine it's AIs continue to propagate at an extremely fast rate and displace people in decision-making power and effective control. Although humans could potentially do something like human brain or human computer interfaces or augmentations of some sort, or eventually mind uploading, I just don't think that will happen in a short enough period of time for that to be as relevant. Now, if AI was emerging 3 decades from now, then I think this would be much more of a question of to what extent is the technology, these AI technologies, being integrated or mixed with people. But at least now, doesn't seem like mind uploading or substantial hardware or computational advantages are to be provided by brain-computer interfaces. So I think this would change the discussion quite a bit. But I think AI development would need to proceed much more slowly for it to be a relevant factor.